You're watching the Eternal Tournament Series.
Hello and welcome back, everyone, to round 2 of the Eternal Tournament Series, the final weekly of Season 3. Once again, I'm joined by my wonderful co-caster, Truedawn, and we are about to bring you guys another fantastic matchup. We're going to have Linyvine on Elysian mid-range versus Maleous on mid-range Rakano. And these are definitely some interesting builds of these decks, I have to say. Certainly the mid-range Rakano.
Yeah, the mid-range Rakano deck it's a weird spot to play mid-range in. Rakano's really good at being heavily aggressive or slowing the game down a lot. Like Ikaria, like that's the best cards Rakano has are Owner and Ikaria. So you have to like be on one of those sides. Fighting in the middle is like a weird spot for Rakano to be, with things like Copper Hall, Bailiff, and martial art. There's obviously Privilege of Rank here, which I have played in decks similar to this before, because you really need a high density of power to get to Ikaria on turn 7 reliably, and you really want to play Ikaria on turn 7 as often as you possibly can. So I like that. It's interesting. We'll see how this plays out.
Yeah, some interesting inclusions or non-inclusions, I guess, is we're seeing like a major lack of weapons in this mid-range Rakano deck. You know, what I would expect out of a mid-range deck would be more weapon-heavy than what we're seeing here, but a little light on that front, even with all the rise to the challenges. On Linyvine's side, we have what looks like a somewhat standard Elysian mid-range list.
Yep, this is pretty typical of, at least the structure is typical of what you would see out of Elysian mid-range. We have some number of friendly wisps, Zenith Obelisk, Cerso, Champion of Wisdom, Myrc's Disciple. Like, he ended up splitting Champion of Wisdom and Myrc's Disciple, and that is a slot that I personally have had a lot of like struggle with, because it's really hard to turn on Champion of Wisdom without playing Stranger, and you kind of don't want to do that. And Steward of Prophecy is good, but like too small, so I like the hedge there with like between Wisdom and Myrc's Disciple. You are playing Zenith Obelisk, so it doesn't get better. Yeah, this is, again, if the format's about mid-range creature combat, the Elysian mid-range is the best at that. So we will see if it's able to overcome this more controlling Rakano as we move into game 1.
Yeah, and quick interesting inclusion I want to point out really quick. Linyvine is leaving one slot in here teched even farther for the mid-range matchup, because he has an infinite hourglass in his main board.
Yeah, that's something I've seen a lot of people advocating for, and that I advocate for. Is it's just one slot. It pays off a lot. It makes your dudes immune to Permafrost. If the format becomes about crystallize, it looks like it's going to be that way. Makes your board immune to crystallize. So it's really low cost and really high payoff. I definitely like the infinite hourglass.
Yeah, I do as well here. We see some very slow early games. Both players using Seek Power. Linyvine, though, does have the initiate down, so he has initiative here. Can decide what he wants to do. He's at 4 power, obviously. Just going to take a little bit of an awkward sequencing turn to drop this friendly wisp, so he can guarantee some card draw. Kind of actually would have liked to see Obelisk here, since you could use friendly wisp in conjunction with False Prince next turn.
Yeah,
on 5 power.
Either playing False Prince to like start the clock that turn, or Obelisk. I would have liked to, especially. I mean, we also have the benefit of knowing Malice's hand, but they're not doing a lot for a bit. They do have the 2 harsh rolls, which are going to come down next turn, but you could have probably gotten an extra 5-10 damage by playing the False Prince turn earlier.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what the follow-up from Linyvine is here, since this is going to determine if Maleous really needs to drop a harsh rule on top of this board or not. And I think with the Obelisk coming down, you're probably inclined to, and definitely if that block is being made, I think we're going to see this harsh rule come down.
Yeah, and Linyvine's pretty well insulated from it. He has the Obelisk in play still. He gets to flash in this links at the end step. He gets to untap play either like Dawnwalker or Cerso. So yeah, Linyvine's in a good spot. Maleous does have another harsh roll, but if Linyvine's able to fight through the second harsh roll without getting blown out, which it looks like he's going to, he should be in an okay spot.
Yeah, and I like his sequencing here to go ahead and drop this Dawnwalker down, being quite patient here and not overextending too much into a harsh roll by dropping down a False Prince, which would have much more easily been cleaned up here. No matter which unit he drops this turn, though, I have a feeling this is going to force a harsh rule out of Maleous now that now that we see the Vanquish take care of the Dawnwalker. Although,
yeah, it's interesting he elects for the polymorph that turn instead of playing a creature. It leaves him with very little pressure, but it does deal with the Iron Thorn. If you assume that's the only Iron Thorn, you want to prevent them from getting up to things like Ikaria, but he's already had Ikaria mana, so I think it's a little bit aggressive. I would have liked to play one of the proactive threats, but I think it's probably not getting better.
Yeah, I think I would have too, though. I think you're correct in that case, and we're probably going to see the harsh rule come down here. Although, curious to see if that is what he wants to go with. Yeah, I was wondering if he might just drop a Jack here on the Surso, and then he can drop Jack on the Dawnwalker next turn if he wants, or vice versa, whichever one he considers to be less of a threat immediately.
I kind of like harsh rule and then just naked Jack afterwards. Like, you don't get the trigger, but you have another Jack and you have initiative with the 6/4. Like, so this is the problem with harsh rule that a lot of like creature mid-rangers or decks run into, where they have creatures to play and they want to stabilize creatures, but now that Maleous extended 2 creatures in this board, his harsh rule is terrible because harsh rule hurts him just as much as it hurts Linyvine.
Yeah, it absolutely does, and he's going to have to, though, since we see Surso doing exactly what Surso does now that he's buffed up to an 8/8 with 2 obelisks in play and just making an absolutely devastating threat. We see Charchain Flow get picked up, and I have a feeling we're going to see Harsh Rule come down here and then a 6-power Charchain Flail established behind it, or he's just going to pass turn. Interesting.
Yeah, 6 kills everything, and well, actually, he's the obelisk in play. Never mind. He actually has 2 obelisks in play. So this is usually the point. If you're playing against a Harsh Rule deck, after they play the second one, I'm generally on the side of you don't play around the third, you just jam.
Was that okay? Yeah. So he goes ahead and drops the Flame Blast in there to take care of the unit, and that's kind of an interesting line of play here because this Initiate's obviously not going anywhere, and this Charchain Flow is just going to kind of be stranded in his hand in the meantime because he's going to have to kill that Silenced Initiate with it.
Yeah, eventually. I mean, he could hold it and try and kill something else with it, something bigger. Although he's only at 10, and Charchain Flail takes all the damage to the face. So, like, even if they play something like Surso, for instance, which we know Linyvine has, that puts them down to 2, and then this Initiate's lethal. So, just it's not a great spot.
Yeah, not a great spot to be in at all. And we see Linyvine still having gas left in the tank, drops this Surso here, and now Maleous is in a very tough position. We're actually going to see Maleous get a slightly upgraded trade here, since this 1/1 will get turned into a 2/2 and soak up an extra point of damage, but he's going to need to find something here immediately to answer this board. And Copper Holith is not going to do it, so Linyvine going to go ahead and take game 1 here with Elysian mid-range as we move into the sideboards.
Yeah, and we saw there that the Elysian mid-range is just like so threat dense that Maleous is going to need like all of his harsh rules and all of his vanquishes to stabilize. Things like Charchain Flail are not going to be good enough once his obelisks are in play. So I'm actually interested if Charchain Flail stay in.
Yeah,
because he's taking a lot of damage to the dome with those.
I think something important that you pointed out there was, harsh rule and your timing on harsh rule is very, very important when you choose to include it in a deck that does play, very, very big and important units like Martial Ironthorn and Jack, because we saw that board state created that was just very hard for Maleous to actually deal with without giving up a lot of value to the harsh rule. So that'll be another issue for him to overcome. But let us check out these sideboards. We'll go ahead and start with Maleous, figure out what he can do to help win this game out. And the first notable inclusion I'm seeing is definitely going to be these Furnace Mages.
Yeah, taking out Xenon Obelisk makes it so a lot of his other removal trades better, like Flame Blast and Charchain Flail. Also, his creatures can actually rumble with the opposing creatures on the baseline sometimes. So, yeah, I would definitely expect to see Furnace Mage. It also deals with Permafrost whenever that matters. So, that's probably the obvious one. Outside of that, all of this seems kind of marginal. I'm not really sure what else I would like. Nothing else is like screaming to me that would be very good in this matchup.
I think Obliterate's decent here since it will clean up most of Linyvine's units, but it's not fantastic, like you said. It's definitely not an auto include, but I have a feeling they'll probably make a splash in the deck.
Yeah, so it's just all marginal cards. It really depends upon what Maleous thinks is bad in his deck, what if anything he wants to side out, if he has spots. Because there's nothing in the sideboard that looks like you actively want to bring in, but if there's things you actively want to bring out, then maybe you bring in some of these marginal cards.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the other side of the table, we see Linyvine. It's honestly hard to say what Linyvine really wants to bring in here because he doesn't have a super great sideboard for this matchup. There's nothing in here I'm seeing that's really fantastic. Maybe some Scorpion Wasp to help block. But that's only if his opponent gets aggressive. Although Scorpion Wasp is amazing at handling Ikaria, so I have a feeling a couple of those will come in.
Yeah, that's pretty reasonable. Linyvine is just kind of pre-boarded for this. Like, Dawnwalker is already really good. All of his threats are already really good. He may want to bring in like Scorpion Wasp for Ikaria if he cares about that. Maybe want to bring in another Champion of Wisdom for another threat. Again, it depends upon what he thinks is bad in the matchup. Permafrost is not great in this matchup. Neither is Polymorph. We could probably see those coming out and just go for a bunch of proactivity or essentially swap out those 4 removal spells for like some number of Scorpion Wasp and the Champion Wisdom. I would not be surprised to see that. Decay doesn't seem good enough because the only weapon on the opposing side is Charchain Flail or potentially more Greenhammer, so I don't think you care about either of those.
No, I don't think you care about either of those either. And yeah, so not a ton of sideboarding out of either player really to be had. I mean, their main board decks are essentially going to be what we're fighting with here. And I do have to say that I think the Elysian mid-range deck is certainly favored in this matchup.
Yeah, just I've played like iterations of this matchup before, and usually drawing Dawnwalker on the Elysian side matters a lot. You can still win without it. It's not like a binary equation that you need it. But Dawnwalker is incredibly difficult for these Armory or Recano mid-range or just like slow, harsh rule decks to deal with.
Yeah, definitely. And we see Linyvine here with a little bit of a slower start. No initiate here. None of his early units like Friendly Wisp, but did pick up a False Print, so that'll give him some action for one of his first few turns. Maleous on the other side of the table just go ahead and dropping a Privilege of Rank, but he also doesn't have a lot going on.
Yeah, Flame Blast is going to get to tag the False Prints here, and Linyvine has like pretty reasonably threat dense hand, and Sandstorm Titan adds to that. So you might see one of the Sandstorm Titans a champion here. He elects for the Sandstorm Titan, and now he still has 2 more giant threats. And Maleous does have 3 removal spells technically, but one of which is Harsh Rule. So this is like Harsh Rule frequently is 5 mana sorcery speed Death Strike in a lot of matchups. It may end up being that way here as well.
Yeah, I have a feeling it is going to be that way, unfortunately for him. We see Linyvine go ahead and drop down the False Prince. That Champion of Wisdom in his hand is going to be completely active next turn. And we see Maleous drop down the Charchain Flow to take care of False Prince. But man, that's got to feel pretty bad here.
And now we're going to get to see from Maleous' side whether or not he's content to pay 5 or 6 life, depending whichever threat Linyvine plays, to give them the opportunity to overextend into the Harsh Rule, because Harsh Rule is just a 1-for-1 is not great. Like, you really don't want to do that. So if Maleous is willing here to pay 6 life, he ended up drawing a Charchain Flow, so he doesn't have to make the decision. But if he drew nothing there, he would have had to choose whether or not he wanted to pay 6 life, let the creature attack, see if he plays anything else to get more value from the Harsh Rule, or just pull the trigger on the 1-for-1.
Yeah, and we're going to see him get offered the same choice again, actually, since we do see another Champion of Wisdom come off the top of the deck. And Maleous is content to let himself take a little bit of damage, but Linyvine in no rush to overextend to the Harsh Rule here, while Maleous is holding 3 cards, just decides to go ahead and do a little bit of punching with the Champion. And this does force the Harsh Rule out of Maleous.
Yeah, I think that was well played by both players. I think Maleous needed more value from the Harsh Rule, or at least needed to try to get more value from the Harsh Rule, and I think Linyvine had no incentive to extend further. So both players, I think, played that pretty well. Now here's another threat in the form of Sandstorm Titan, and Ironthorn does not rumble with that.
No, it certainly does not, and I'm curious to see if Linyvine's going to jump in the Scorpion Wasp. He definitely should, and in fact does. And I like this play a lot. Yeah, exactly. It's going to force a chump block here one way or another. And we're going to see the Scorpion Wasp get taken care of. Sandstorm Titan still left on the board, though. And Maleous does at least pick up a removal to it, but we know Linyvine has the ability to reload with this Marison's Disciple. and he's just going to put his opponent on having another card.
The Beetle becomes a 5/5, so he draws 2 cards.
Oh, geez. Yeah, that's true. I wasn't even considering that because he is at 8 power, so he does get to draw 2 here. And yeah, Maleous just not going to be able to do it here. Not a single unit he could pick up right here that's going to keep him alive since he is on 2.
Jack tags 2 creatures, or counts for like blocking 2 creatures, but there are 3 in play, so
Yeah,
not quite
exactly.
enough.
He almost got there with the Jack, but yeah, unfortunately, it's just not going to be enough. And we're going to see Maleous go down here. And yeah, that Rakano mid-range, we see it just having such a hard time dealing with the Elysian mid-range because, as you alluded to at the very top of the round, Elysian mid-range, when it comes down to the mid-range decks, is just such a hard deck to brawl with. Their units are so threatening, and they come down so quick.
Yeah, and also the Rakano mid-range deck is in a weird spot where like it has like reasonable proactivity. Like that deck, it really wants to play Ikaria on turn 7. Like you're not a control deck or anything. You really just want to slow down the game enough to where you're not dead on turn 7, and then you play an Ikaria on turn 7, and that wins the game. Like that's the main game plan. But the clock that the Elysian mid-range deck puts on is so heavy that your removal just doesn't line up well enough to it, and you're just on the back foot. And even if you do play an Ikaria, it probably has to block at some point because there's so much pressure, and it cannot block profitably. Everything's bigger than it.
Exactly. Like, and that feels so terrible when like the crux of your deck essentially is being reduced to a chump blocker instead of just this super threat that you expect to carry the game out with. And the Elysian players just not even threatened because they put you under so much pressure so quickly. It's a very weird position to be in. Definitely in that matchup with the Rakano mid-range deck. He needs a very solid hand, and unfortunately, we just didn't see it there.
Yeah, it's just a weird spot for Rakano. It's kind of like the Navani and Jack in like that archetype in general, are just in like the no man's land of Rakano, where like the cards you want to play with Navani and Jack like don't go into the decks that Navani and Jack go into. And so it's just like, it's really weird trying to fight in that dead zone. I do think that we could get to a point later, like when set 2 is released or the format evolves, where there's more tools for that slower Rakano type deck, and it'll be fine. But like, because those cards are very powerful, but the support structure around them, I don't think is there right now.
Yeah, I don't think it is either. And I definitely think if you're going to build a Rakano mid-range deck, I feel like it looks sort of like just Rakano Armory to some extent. I feel like you definitely need to be kind of weapon heavy in your main deck. And, you know, just kind of you leverage those as your removal. That way you have plenty of threats. And, I mean, weapons are often removal, but sometimes can just be a way to clean up the game. So... it's definitely an interesting spot for the Rakano mid-range deck to be in. Hopefully, with the release of Set 2, it will see a little bit more resurgence. As it stands, Rakano aggro really is, or Rakano plate really is like the only deck I think that's kind of keeping up right now.
I do think there's just straight 2-color iterations of Armory that are good. Now that Steward of the Past is Double Shadow and you can't really play him, the incentive to splash Shadow isn't as heavy. You could play Statue in this spot, but if you just want to like clean up your mana, play 2 colors, it'd be totally fine. So yeah, I'm actually surprised that a lot of we are not, at least we have yet to see Rakano plate. I think Rakano plate is exceptionally well positioned in this mirror. Also, just like probably one of the better decks in the format, like on a raw power level basis. And because the entire format is just like really slow, and that deck just steamrolls everything. So apparently everyone's just content to adhere to this gentleman's agreement of just playing like slow 3-color decks.
Yeah, and it definitely does make for an interesting tournament scene when we do see more of these 3-color decks. But I have to agree, I am surprised we don't see any Rakano aggro. I mean, it's kind of the same situation where we saw a lot of people playing Burn Queen a while back, and the reason was that it didn't even matter if Burn Queen was well positioned in the format, although it just mattered that the deck was so brutally efficient, and it could just close out games so quickly that it really created a scenario where mid-range and control decks were just having such a hard time thriving. And I definitely feel like Rakano can take up that position again of making it hard on the mid-range and control decks when it can just steamroll you in 4 or 5 turns. As we saw in our first round matchup,
Yep.
where the Rakana player just ran through.
And we do have a backup match, as we just jumped into game 3 between Thundershot on Time Justice Primal mid-range deck versus Elunex on Film Control. This is the decisive game, and Thundershot doesn't have a particularly fast hand here.
No, he really does not. I mean, he's got a Sandstorm Titan that he can at least drop on 4, which will put Elunex under some pressure. But Elunex playing Film Control here should definitely have some sort of answer for this. I can't imagine a world where he's not holding an Annihilate or a Death Strike in his hand for this.
I mean, it's possible. He's gonna have to spend his whole next turn doing it because he was tapped down to 1 mana there. So we'll see if he has a Death Strike or an Annihilate, or if he waits to untap, which I would doubt. I would assume at least that Thundershot has Protects in the sideboard.
Ooh, and interesting. We're gonna see Slow come down here.
There it is.
Yeah, that's certainly an interesting inclusion. And yeah, we don't see a response out of Elunex. So I guess the world in which where there's no Annihilate or Death Strike in Elunex's hand is the world we are currently living in.
Yeah, and so Slow is an incredibly powerful card that I think it is my pick for most underplayed card in the entire game, because it frequently just exiles a card. Like, so if Thundershot takes like Champion of Chaos or Champion of Cunning, Harbinger, or Withering Witch here, it's not castable for the rest of the game. As long as he's able to put on a reasonable clock, like there's sometimes where the game will slow down to a point where they get to 10 mana. But it essentially just gets to exile something that costs like 4 or more. And that's an incredibly powerful effect. And you also get to see their entire hand, which is something only Slow does as a discard spell, because normally you can only see legal targets for a discard spell, but for Slow, everything's a legal target.
Yeah, that is very true. It does give you a ton of information, and we did fortunately get to take a nice little peek at Elunex's hand. So we do know this Withering Witch is coming down, but Thundershot, if he chooses to, could permafrost this so he can push an extra 5 damage. I'm not too sure about this play, since obviously we know Elunex will have something to follow up with on the next turn. But it does push an extra 5 damage in the meantime. That permafrost is just kind of hanging out.
I mean, the permafrost isn't going to like really get better. It's pretty bad in this matchup. It doesn't interact favorably with like the Champion of Chaos or the other Withering Witch. I guess it's fine in the Harbinger, but it doesn't really do a lot. So using it to push 5 damage and end up pushing 10 damage, actually, as it turned out, it's definitely worth it.
Yeah, definitely when you end up pushing 10 damage, I have to say it's worth it. Did not expect it to end up being worth that much value, but certainly was there. And Thundershot, in the meantime, has presented a very reasonable clock on Elunex.
Yeah, he can deal with this there sometime, but it requires a trade. Like, this Champion of Cunning trades with it. He like probably isn't even going to block. Just going to take another 5, I would assume. Yeah, and so he's going to need to deal with it at some point. He has time, but not a lot.
Yeah, that is true. He really does not have a lot of time, certainly with the Valkyrie Enforcer coming down. Going to force him to make some awkward blocks here, as he can just swing in and guarantee either 5 or 3 damage. Another permafrost, or not another, but the first permafrost we saw out of Elunex earlier finally coming down, and Elunex picking up a feeding time going to be important, as this actually allows him to flip around and start creating a clock.
Valkyrie's a really good draw to take out the counter pressure from Elunex. But we saw Elunex being pretty liberal with his life total there, which is something we actually get to do against these like Combrei-based mid-range decks, because they don't have reach. So like whatever damage you're taking, like whatever damage is on the table, that's what you're taking. Like there's nothing coming out of hand. So as long as you're able to keep the board clear, you can go down to 1 and it doesn't matter. So we saw Elunex like using his life total as a resource to buy time to set everything else up.
Yeah, and we're going to see what the Seraph hits here. This is going to be important. Sauropod Wrangler, not the greatest hit, but not the worst hit either. Not super important, though. It doesn't really increase his clock by a ton. Although, if Elunex doesn't have some sort of removal here, with the second Permafrost coming down on the Champion of Cunning, he is in a bit of a tricky situation.
He's not dead right now, but he is going to 1. Or if the Seraph activates, then it's... Well, I guess he's going to 1 regardless, because the 2 cartridges are profitable attacks anyway, so activating does make sense. Yeah, and it's a Navani.
Ooh, Navani. That's a pretty big pull here. Hardly honestly matters at this point, truthfully.
Yeah, it's just an 8/8.
Yeah, Elunex has to
Oh,
find. Oh,
we all missed that. Everyone missed that.
yeah, huge. Not huge, but yeah, slight misplay out of Thundershot there. Actually, did have lethal if you drop the Infinite Hourglass, since giving your units endurance does break permafrost. And
That's something I'm like notoriously guilty of. I will like never silence my things with permafrost. Once they're permafrosted, I pretend they're not there, just like out of my sight.
you and me both, man. I am terrible about remembering that little interaction, since it is just it's a very interesting interaction that all the other card games, including digital card games I've played, haven't really had anything quite like it.
Yeah, like there's things like permafrost and magic, like arrest and pacifism and all that. But usually, like giving the creature a keyword doesn't take it off. Like usually, you'd have to like consciously target it with some kind of removal. But in this game, like it just gets endurance and it breaks immediately, and like it's easy to miss that, or you can silence your own unit. So it's a common interaction, but something that people like me forget constantly. So.
Yeah, definitely. I am totally guilty of it as well, even though it is, like you said, just a common interaction. It's something that, I'm sure a ton of our viewers and players run into all the time. Definitely on the latter, since silence as well as permafrost and freezing effects like crystallizer are so prevalent in the game. But we do see Thundershot taking it down there 2-1 with his. Was that a Shimmering Combry list, or
no? Just
TFT
Elysian
mid-range?
mid-range. People have dispatched with the shimmer packs today. They're just playing good cards, which I like. I'm here for it.
Yeah, it certainly seems to be working out very well for them. And, some of the better decks in the format, I don't think have had a huge showing today, since we are on that mid-range. Obviously, Shimmer Pack, a very destructive force against Armory-style decks. And I have a feeling, though I haven't taken a full look at the field, that Armory is seeing a very, very light showing today, since the tournament series has been very mid-range heavy recently.
Yep, and we do have a third backup match for you guys. Fortunately, we have Toth once again in his Fiery Comrade deck against NEOOO on what looks to be some kind of Elysian deck. You can get the deck list and see what kind it is.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and take a look at that list. But in the meantime, I think we are in game 3 here. I'm going to assume we're in game 3, so let's call it like it is. This is do or die here, and NEOOO dropping down a Scorpion Wasp just at the end of his turn. That's very curious. Wonder if he's just trying to put some pressure onto Toth, but Toth over here with just a massive hand, not going to be under any type of pressure. Ooh, we see Crystallize coming down.
Yeah, it probably does have to use that stand together. Like, what else is it doing? Yeah, I think that's the best it's going to get. And this is Shimmering Combray on the side of NEOOO, so that's why you do see all these little nonsense creatures. So Toth just needs to like keep the board stable, and he should be okay. I think his plan should be up to build up these Iron Thorns to ultimate and then attack for lethal. That's probably his most likely path to victory. He also has this Ruin in hand to kill this Xenon Obelisk at any point he deems necessary. So he has a lot of tools to win this game. I definitely favor him from this point, especially with NEOOO only one card left.
Yeah, I think this is absolutely in Toth's favor. I don't know if there's anything NEOOO can really do here to win this game, truthfully, since Toth just has all the answers currently. He has a torch to handle anything flying over. He has a Desert Marshal to silence the Scorpion Wasp and bring it down if he needs to. He's got Ruin to take care of the Obelisk. He's got this Marshal. He's got double Marshal, Ironthorn, Mystic Ascendant. So he's going to draw 3 extra cards here. He's got Vanquish to take care of anything really nasty that NEOOO can come up with. I mean, this is just looking like an absolutely brutalizing game for NEOOO right here. I don't think there's any way he's going to be able to find an out.
Toth also has the option here of parliamenting and then next turn play power, ultimate Ironthorn, lethal. Although I think it's going to be lethal, especially with that attack going through. It's lethal regardless. So he's going to play the Parliament anyway, but I'm not sure he needed to. Although I'm not sure what punishes him for not leaving mana up anyway. So
yeah,
even the Shimmer Pack is like, you could just chump block with the Owls.
Yeah, this at least creates a situation where it's maybe possible for NEOOO not to die. I mean, he can force he can force some chump blocks here out of Toth, and we do see everything get converted over. And, if he does board swing here, this is going to force Toth to, at least block some of these units. He can let a couple of them through, but...
Interesting no attack there. Like, I'm not sure your attacks are getting better if you're Neo. Like, maybe he has a Crystallized in hand or an Vizian Obelisk, but I'm not sure it's getting better than that. And that Shimmer Pack is actually very good. It takes away the Iron Thorn, so the Plague wasn't there. Now he has to slog through 5/6/6s, which he has some tools to do, but not a lot.
Yeah, although, with
it's actually lethal, right? Yeah, because he can just kill this, attack to get through. He goes to 8, torches lethal.
Yeah, and that's what I was gonna say. Is I think the Vanquish taking care of one is really important here. If he hadn't had the Vanquish, it was entirely possible. Oh, and we're also gonna see Ruin come down here, which is gonna bring these all onto level so that they all get traded back and forth. And that's more just insult to injury here as we see the Torch come down to provide lethal for Toth.
Yep, and see, we told you Toth bounce back. There he is, just taking care of Shimmering Combre. So all of the non-Shimmer Pack Elysian decks performing very well this far on stream.
Yeah, the Elysian decks have done well, but Shimmer Pack itself doesn't seem like it's having the best day. And we do see Toth. That was, in fact, Game 3. So Toth, bringing down Game 3 there for himself. Like you said, bouncing back. And back to 1-1 in the bracket. So definitely off to a much better start than the last game we got to see him in.
Yeah, and it'll be cool to see if he's able to do well in this tournament again. Cool to see if these Elysian decks keep doing as well as they've been doing in the early rounds. I do think that Surso and Crystallize are a good spot to be right now. I also think Rakata Play is a good spot to be. Maybe that's in tournament as well. We just haven't seen it yet. So it'll be interesting to see how things play out as we move into round 3 in a little bit.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see. But I think we're going to go ahead and take a short break, folks. We will come back with coverage of round 3 in just a few moments, so do not go anywhere.